Hi, my name is Haley Osborne, and this is my presentation on the article Asia's Four Little Tigers, a comparison of the role of education in their development by Paul Morris. So our objectives is to examine the role which education has played in the rapid development of the four Asian tigers, which included Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore. And then also look at similarities and differences in the role of the state, the role of technical education, which included primary, secondary, vocational, and tertiary, which I'll discuss later in this, and of the school curriculum. So a little bit of background is that at this time, around or before 1965, they had high levels of illiteracy from the aftermath of wars and civil wars. And so from 1965 to 1990, the 23 economies of Asia grew faster than all other regions in the world. There was a second rapid growth called the Asian Tigers, which were Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore, and that began around 1965. There were tensions between Taiwan and South Korea and British colonies with the Chinese Republic, which influenced development, and education played a critical role in facilitating economic and technological advancement. So education and development at this time were identified with two broad approaches to development. And so the first approach was structural and institutional factors, which were traditions. And so some of those traditions were high-level manpower in development, which resulted in a focus on the expansion of tertiary or third-level schooling, secondary schooling, and vocational schooling. And then instead of a focus on physical wealth, they focused on questions of efficiency and the economic returns for different levels of schooling. The second approach was a focus on values and attitudes. So the need for achievement and the developing of established values, so punctuality and competitiveness. And then education was a way of developing and a vehicle for transmitting their values and attitudes. Education became viewed as a crucial agent for the rapid growth of nations. So this I'll be coming back to after I kind of discuss the primary, secondary, tertiary schooling, but this is kind of the pyramid of schooling. So we have primary at the bottom, secondary in the middle, and then tertiary on top. So primary schooling was a high level of access to elementary or primary schooling. So in 1965, South Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong were over 100% in this primary schooling, and Taiwan was 97.15% of age groups enrolled in education. Levels of basic education equaled high levels of literacy. So literacy jumped up once they started this primary schooling. Both boys and girls benefited, and it decreased male and female discrepancies. The state took over primary schooling and determined who should be educated and provided the schools and funding to provide equal opportunity of education for everyone. So this was kind of the base of the pyramid. So this included most of the kids. Secondary schooling started when industrialization was booming in these economies, and they were selective elitists and academics with regard to curricular orientation and highly competitive to get into. To prepare a minority of pupils to enter the final stage of formal education. So this was kind of a little more upper class schooling for children. And in 1986, Taiwan rose to 92%, Singapore to 71%, South Korea to 95%, and Hong Kong to 96%. And this was slower due to political crisis that was going on in Hong Kong. The vocational and technical schooling, this wasn't actually in the pyramid that I showed you, but this included the greatest diversity of the different countries and provided for very small groups of pupils. This was for low income and less able pupils. So it wasn't as academically oriented as primary and secondary education. And mostly in Hong Kong and Singapore, that's where you mostly saw the vocational and technical schooling. And it focused more on labor intensive mass production of cheap exports. So it was mostly factory jobs. And it wasn't so much education or academic, I mean. So the next was tertiary schooling, and this was at the very top of the pyramid. And this was full-time post-secondary education. And this followed the achievement of levels of access to secondary schooling, mostly a small elite sector of education. So this was even more elite than the secondary schooling. And this was high academic curriculum for students considered to be the cream of the secondary schools, high academic achievements. It ensured employment in the civil service and some socially prestigious and financially rewarding professional areas. So this included medicine, law, engineering, and teaching were some of the jobs. So in 1965, South Korea only had 6%, Singapore 10%, and Hong Kong 5%. So it was very selective who was able to get this tertiary schooling. The curriculum included primary and secondary schooling, was strongly governed by the state, and so it resulted in uniform national curriculum. So they had kind of a uniform curriculum for primary and secondary. And then it was very examination driven. So teaching and learning had the goal of maximizing success through highly competitive tests. And this promoted political and social stability, and they used English in schools to unify as a national language. And then it promoted both an awareness of Chinese culture, identity, and awareness of concepts consistent with democracy and a liberal political culture. So, as a summary, the state played a huge role in funding and providing for schools. The more development and industrialization, the greater the need for education. Levels of schooling, which were primary, secondary, vocational, and tertiary. And then the higher level of education equaled higher lifetime earnings. So the more education you got, the more money you would make with the jobs that you could get, provided the level of education you received. And then standardized curriculum and examinations. And then they believed the key for anyone to succeed was diligence, discipline, and hard work. And that's the end. Thank you.